Okay, well, we'll go ahead and begin. And I just want to thank you guys for dealing with the scramble on the change of the website and the Zoom link. I appreciate your flexibility with that. Don't have any good excuses. Well, maybe I do, but mostly, we're glad to have you here and joining our training today. So by way of introduction, my name is Rebecca Peterson, and I am the College and Career Readiness Assessment Specialist at USBE, which means that Utah Aspire Plus fits squarely within some of the things that I do at the state office. And with me today, I've got our team from Pearson, and they're going to be leading us through the training and the things that we're doing today. As we go, if you have questions, please type them into the chat. And we've got a number of people that are here to be able to help answer questions. And we have some of our Pearson Help Desk team with us. So if you have problems logging in, if you've got problems with your account not working quite right, we want to make sure that you can actually get into your account as we go, because we will be going through exercises and really working in kind of a workshop format to be able to get you familiar with the systems, and you'll see if you have any questions. So again, if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and we will either answer in the chat, or if there's something that a help desk person is able to assist you with, they'll reach out and say, Rebecca, I can help you with your account question or something, and then that way we'll be able to keep the training going and also get you the any assistance that you might need with your account. So I think that's all of kind of our housekeeping to start the meeting, but I want to turn the time over to our Pearson team to introduce themselves, and then also to just dive right in.
Thanks, Rebecca. This is Dawn Brandt, and I am the program manager at Pearson, supporting USBE and the Utah Aspire Plus. I have with me Tyler Hicks, who is part of our team at Pearson, who will be presenting the training. And if any of you have had this training before, you might remember him from last year, helping out with the training, and he is doing so again today. As Rebecca mentioned, we also have a handful of folks from our support desk, and they'll be available to help get you logged in. If you're having any issues with your account or anything, or you have any questions as we go, they'll be picking up some of those questions, especially with everyone trying to get on both the Pearson Access Next site. With that, if there's nothing, I'll go ahead, Tyler, turn it over to you, and we can get started.
Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. My name is Tyler. I am going to be covering how to use Pearson Access Next and some of our other platforms to prepare and administer the Aspire Plus assessment today. And just for a little bit of information, these slides will be available, and we'll cover where those will all be located throughout this presentation. Also, if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. With that, we'll keep moving forward. There's a great deal of information for us to cover today, but if you do have those questions, just put them in the chat, just like Rebecca said. We're going to start off with a general overview of the platforms you'll use to prepare for and administer the assessments, along with some important dates. We'll then go into more detail regarding Pearson Access Next and talk about the tasks that must be completed by administrators, including setting up for your local infrastructure trial and verifying online testing readiness. We'll also cover tasks to monitor sessions and close out your administration. So let's talk a little about what's new for the spring 2021 Aspire administration. Some new functionality we have is setting your student accommodations on our newly redesigned personal needs profile settings page. We also have test administrators giving the ability to create test sessions using a CSV file upload process. Also, we have students, they're going to be asked opportunity to learn survey questions at the end of their science assessments. These questions will provide information about student learning experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have testing times that are decreasing for the reading and math assessments, and also have students taking math and science assessment. They'll have access to both the online Desmos calculator, which you've had in the past, and now also the online Texas Instruments calculator. And then we have a new alternate mouse pointer accommodation that's available. Let's talk about the Utah Aspire Plus Resource Center. This site is where you'll be able to find all things related to the Utah Aspire Plus. You can find test administration manual, the schedule of events, and links to resources and training materials, student test preparation resources like the student tutorials and question samplers, and additional resources for technology and reporting. You should consider this a one-stop shop for accessing all things related to Utah Aspire Plus. And we have that URL up on the slide that you're seeing right now. I'd highly recommend you bookmarking that, as you will need to access many different resources out on that site. And let's flip over. We can kind of show you some navigation to some of those resources that you'll be needing for the assessment. So from the Resource Center, if you go to the Resources and Training section, one of the most desired pieces of information is the Test Administration Manual. You can find that under the Administration Manual tab. It's a downloadable PDF. There's a lot of good information in this TAM that we'll continue to reference throughout this training today. We also have the Spring 2021 Utah Aspire Plus schedule of events. We're going to cover key dates in a little bit, but this is where you can go within the Resource Center to access that schedule of events. So again, we got the test administration manual within the slides. We have the link to the actual manual. So as I said, these slides will be posted later, so you'll have access to that URL. So here's some key dates to be aware of. These dates can also be found on that schedule of events that was on the Resource Center. We have district level users creating user logins that are currently available. You can create sample students and test sessions in the training site, and that's also currently available. We have question samplers and practice tests that are available currently through the Resource Center and or their training Pearson Access Next site. We have the virtual test admin training, which you're in today. We also have a training site user account set up, and you can go in any time in the training site and set up your user accounts. The Pearson Access Next live site for the Spring 21 administration went live on January 6th, and you can go in currently and verify and make sure you're updating your student registration information. That is happening currently through. We recommend March 1st. You can do it after that time, but we highly recommend all that is happening prior to the administration starting. We have a technical coordinator training that's happening on February 9th. And then we've got local infrastructure trials, highly recommended, happening from January 25th all the way through February 22nd. The accommodated materials order window will open up on February 15th and go through May 12th. And then we have the Aspire Plus summative assessment window opening up on March 8th, and that'll go through May 15th. To help students prepare for the summative test, we have question samplers. Those are currently available again. Those are for students to practice using the testing format, like the summative assessment. Question samplers are also available in Spanish Transadaptive. These tests will be combined for grades 9 and 10 with one test per content area. You have a couple of options for giving students access to these question samplers. One is to perform the test preparation tasks in Pearson Access Next training site, printing the student test tickets and have them log in through TestNav. You can also have students access the question samplers directly from Utah Aspire Plus Resource Center. So in addition to the question samplers, we also have access to a TestNav student tutorial. This will provide students and teachers an overview of the features students will be able to utilize while testing. And again, you can access that student tutorial, by going to the Pearson Access Next or Utah Aspire Plus Resource Center. So just popping over to the Resource Center, kind of show you guys where you can access those question samplers and the tutorials. So from the Utah Aspire Plus Resource Center, you'll notice the test preparation tab at the top. And within that dropdown, you can access those materials. Next, I'm going to talk about the Pearson Access Next live site. Let's take a minute now to see if you can get logged into this site. I have the URL up on the screen. If you are having any troubles, again, we'll have the Pearson Access Help Desk folks. They are on the chat to help you get logged into that site. But while you try and log in, I'm going to talk a little bit about functions of this system. This is the system used to perform different tasks to prepare for and administer the Aspire Plus summative assessment. You may have used Pearson Access Next to administer the ACT, but you will use a separate login for this account. District administrator accounts will be created by Pearson, and districts will create additional district school level user accounts. Depending on the user's role, some of the tasks that will be performed include managing test registrations, assigning and ordering accommodations, managing and monitoring test sessions, and accessing and viewing different reports, and printing out student test tickets. I just want to give everybody a chance to go ahead and get logged in. All right. So the next thing I'd like to discuss is the Pearson Access Next Training Center overview. That URL is also on the screen. For today's demonstration purposes and examples that we're going to walk you through, we'll be utilizing the training center. If you want to, go ahead and take a minute to see if you can get logged into this site. And then again, while you try and log in, I'll discuss kind of the functions about this system. The Pearson Access Next training site does not or should not contain any secure student data. This site allows you to generate sample students that you can use to practice test setup tasks. This is also the site you can use to administer question samplers through the test session creation process, including printing those student test tickets. And like the Pearson Access Next live site, administrators will invite other district and school level users to this site. And I see Dawn Brandt also posted the link to this site out on the chat. So thank you for that, Dawn. So now that we've introduced Pearson Access Next, we're going to take a closer look at the specific tasks in the site. So some of the main tasks that administrators will perform include creating and maintaining district and school level Pearson Access Next user accounts, verifying student registration, managing student transfers, ordering and approving paper accommodated materials, verifying online testing readiness, creating and managing test sessions, and viewing reports. We'll take a closer look at each of these tasks, and then you will have an opportunity to practice some of the key tasks.
Hey, Tyler.
Yes.
I'm going to jump in for just a moment. There's a question about school level admin being able to create school level teacher and proctor accounts. It's my understanding that school level can create other school. If you're an administrator, you can create teacher and proctor accounts, but you can't create other admin accounts.
That would be my understanding as well. Yes.
Yeah, so Kenley, let me know if you have questions about that. And then if you're at the district level, you can create, so it's basically district admin can create below that permission level. School admin can create below that permission level. So district can create basically anything except for the district person.
Ooh.
And then
Actually, correction there, Rebecca. I believe district level users can also create other district level users. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the initial district person for your school, or if you're a charter school, for your school, or for the school district has to be created by the state. But after that, then the district person can create all other accounts.
That's correct.
Let's see.
Are there any other questions?
If somebody is struggling to create accounts, the Pearson Access Next user guide actually steps through the process for creating accounts.
That's correct. And we're also going to walk through I think that's actually my first demonstration, is kind of walking through the user creation process as well. So.
Right. And just, this is Dawn, and just to support what Rebecca said, if the person continues to struggle in creating accounts, they're more than welcome. I know Tyler at the end will be putting up a number for Pearson's call center staff that can certainly help walk folks through, especially if they continue to struggle even after looking at the instructions. So.
Let's see, Hema had a question about our previous accounts still there. Previous accounts may still be there, but they may be inactive. So with the delay in testing the cancellations from last year, if people didn't log in, then their accounts may have become inactive and need to be reinstated. So the accounts still exist unless they've been disabled, in which case they need to be re-enabled, but they may find that if they haven't logged in, that their account was disabled due to inactivity. So how can we tell if an account is inactive? If it shows an active end date when you look at it, Tyler, are you going to go into that?
Yep,
okay, so let's save that question.
Yeah.
And then as Tyler's going through user count information, he can show you where all that information is.
That's correct. We're going into it right now, in fact.
Rebecca, this is Lorraine. I have been able to search in the past by username, and I haven't been able to find those this year. They want their cactus number. What is that? Is it a problem?
For Utah Aspire Plus? Are you talking about in the...
To look for my users to make sure they're okay.
Should be able to search by name. We don't collect cactus ID numbers.
Well, that was weird. So
Well, unfortunately, when account has become disabled, the search feature might become, we might not be returning a value on that user. So I can walk through the process and describe that here in just a moment on that, on how you can find that user and re-enable those accounts.
That's what I was looking to do. Thank you.
Yep. We're going to cover all of that. So we'll start talking about users right now. Yeah, no worries at all. There are 4 different, we've kind of mentioned here, there are 4 different roles here within Pearson Access Next. We have administrator, we have proctor, we have teacher, and then we have technology staff. So note that, certain roles have certain tasks that they can perform within the system. So you can refer to our user role matrix, which can also be found on the Resource Center if you do have any questions regarding functionality for your role. And this is just kind of an example on the screen of what that user role matrix would look like. And for instance, this example, only administrators and teachers are able to create user accounts. And this is just an example here. So, okay, let's talk about searching for your user. Since we've had a couple questions on this, I'm going to come over to Pearson Access next here, and we're going to show you guys that process. So if we go to users, let's have me log in here. Start from the home screen. So coming in from the home screen, you'll notice we have the three main menus up in the banner. Note the brown banner. I am in the training environment for all this information, but should work very similar to the live site. So within the setup drop down, or you can access the menu in the top bar as well, you're going to want to go to the users option. From the users site, you can notice that we have find users. You can search by last name or their email address. You can also do additional filters below. So if you already know their username, which is typically their email address, or their first name, you can also filter by that. You can also notice that we have this account status filter. So if you do have a user who you are not returning a search on, if you add this filter by disabled, you probably have a lot more success locating that user. Should you not be returning a search results for that user, one way that I've also found that you can find that user is to just create a new user. So we're going to walk you through that creation process right now. So I'm just going to create a little sample user ID for myself under my organization, and I'm just going to assign myself the teacher role. You want to populate all the required fields, which are notated by a red asterisk. And we're going to, typically I would leave my username, my email address, but for today's purpose, we're going to just change that. And then you can set an active begin date and end date as well, but these aren't required fields. So you'll see that I have a success changes saved green banner at the top, noting that my user was created. Now, if your user was in a disabled status, you would also receive a message that success changes saved, but we also notice that this user already has an account created for them. At that point, you could just click on that user's name in the list here. And if you'll notice, you have an account enabled status. If they were in disabled status, it would appear like this, and then you could just enable them again. So hopefully that answers your question and can help you get your disabled users added back in. So a couple ways of doing it there. So you can also
let's just pause for a minute and make sure everybody was able to get in and
sure, of course,
and take a look at the users. So our goal as we're going through this is that you're following through on your side, to try it since we're not in person and we're not walking around. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. And if for some reason you find you can't log in or whatever, please put your name and information in the chat. And then one of the Pearson Help Desk people who are here with us, they can take care of helping you with whatever you need to get in. Looks like there's a question in here about re-enabling a teacher, but it still doesn't find her. So Tyler, are you aware of?
Yeah, the only thing I can think is if you're sitting in the training site, Rebecca, if whoever's asking the question, as I've been going through and verifying users here in the last few days, the only thing I've noticed is that sometimes, if you have an ID created in the live site, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the same user in the training site. So it's quite possible that that user doesn't have a login within both environments. Just because you have one in the live site does not mean that you will have one in both environments. They are independent of each other.
Tyler, also, we're getting a couple of questions regarding the enable. If they re-enable a user, does the user get a new email, or they're just...
I do not think that they receive an email on that. The one way that you can trigger to send a new email is, for instance, if I find that user and re-enable them, you can go then and select that, that user, and then from the task dropdown, you can select reset password, and this will send them a triggered email and also giving them the opportunity to reset their password on Pearson Access Next.
And then, Tyler, real quick again, you want to show, so that somebody doesn't have to re-enter a user again, how they can search for disabled and then re-enable them right from that screen instead of having to type in.
Yeah, I can do that for sure. So if we have, for instance, someone's last name, you would probably want to add their, it'd be better if I had an example of a disabled user, but if you can put someone's name in here in the search field, and then within the filter box here, you could see we have account status. And then there's a disabled feature here. And then you could click the search button. They also have the deleted status. So that'd be a great way to, you know, if you're still not finding it within the disabled, you can also check to see if that user was selected for delete as well.
And I think I know that you're going to show us this, I believe, but is there a way to mass load users?
Yes, we will be showing that right after this.
Thank you.
Once we have found them and they're disabled, how do we enable them from right? Do that?
Yeah, so just going into, so once you've found them, you should be able to select that username within the list. And then from the task dropdown, you can go into that create and edit user, click the start button.
Okay.
And then there is an account dropdown, and that should say disabled. You should be able to select that dropdown and click enabled.
And get rid of the end.
And Tyler, just to add to that, you will need to press the save button for that action to take effect. That's on the top right. And almost always it's best if you're enabling a disabled account to reset the password and generate the link that goes to that account's email ID for a password reset. If they had a disabled account, chances are they don't remember the password. Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you.
And Tyler, I think there's still an outstanding question about the role. I want to back up to the role a little bit too, on the difference what a proctor can do versus a teacher. I know we referred them to the user role matrix, but do you know offhand? It's pretty much, it's a little bit different, right?
Yeah, it is. Proctor role, does not have all the uses and tasks assigned to their user role. But again, without having the user role matrix pulled up, I can't specify exactly all the roles.
The basic difference between teacher and proctor is that proctors can't see assessment reports. They can't add accommodations. So basically, a proctor role is somebody that you would want to assign if they are going to be starting a test, handing out test tickets, and running the test in the room, but not necessarily doing the setup. If you are having teachers involved in doing setup and entering things, then I would assign them the teacher role, particularly so that then they can also look at the results and be able to see the reporting. Tyler, there's been a couple of questions about deleting teachers who are no longer at a school and whose permissions need to be removed.
Yeah.
Going to briefly touch on that?
Yeah, I can. So for instance, I have this user that I don't necessarily need, or this person won't be a teacher any longer within my district. So again, just like other functionality, you would select that user, come to the task dropdown and select delete. This is another way that this same option is restore. So if you have deleted somebody and you need to restore them, you would use the same option. But once you've selected that in the task dropdown, click the start button. And if I want to delete it, I am going to select that user from the delete user or restore user screen and just click delete. As you can see, it adds a red X next to my username. And you can see at the top, success change is saved. That's your confirmation that it worked. And so then you can exit tasks and come back out. And as you notice in my my users in my list, that user is no longer in the list of users. And then just to
Tyler,
show
there's a request to do that one more time.
Yes, of course.
That process again.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch real quick because, you know, with me deleting that user, I can show anyone how the deleted filter works as well. So just to show you all that I did a search on my last name for that user, and then I set my filter of account status to deleted, and you can see that that user that I just deleted is sitting in the list now. So I am going to restore this user using the delete restore function in the task dropdown and click start. Coming back into the delete screen, I'm going to restore that user. As you can notice, that red X that was next to my username is now gone. If we exit this task, come back to the main screen, and we will show all results. You can see that that user is back in here again. But to show you the delete function again, select your user, and from the task dropdown, select delete users and click the start button. From the delete restore users screen, you will select that user again and click the delete restore button. And just like I was showing before, it'll display a red X next to that username. And that user is now no longer on that list. Oops. Is there any other questions on that functionality from the user screen?
I'm just scrolling up through the chat really quickly. I think we've got everything, but if not, I will chime in. So why don't we continue? Oh, actually, here's one. Is there a way to see all accounts? So maybe talking about the list that, you know, how can you see all users that are available?
Yeah, that probably would be best run through the export process, in which I'm going to be showing you, because through the UI, I'm not aware of a way to show all. Unless Cyril, I know you're online. If you're aware, if you can show all of those, no matter the status.
Hey, Tyler, sorry. I
okay.
was looking at something else. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the question is whether or not within the UI, they can see all users, whether they're in deleted or disabled status, or even neither of those category. If you can just see the full list within the UI.
I think you can do the export if you need to see all of them, but online you'll have to toggle the account status filter to get to that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we are going to show you guys the export process to show all, and that's coming up in the next, I did want to show you, here's an example of the email that you receive when you do set up a new user account or even a password reset. So it would look very similar to an email like this. But to show you how you can view all users under your account, we mentioned the import export. So let me walk you guys through that process. So coming in through the home site again on Pearson Access Next, within the setup menu, wherever you access it, you have an option for import export data. If you click this action, it'll take you to the import export data screen. And within the drop down, you'll select import export data again and click the start button. So this will take you to the tasks for importing and exporting screen, and you'll notice we have a type dropdown. Now within the type dropdown, you're going to select user export. Once you select that option, you can click the process button, and you'll get a screen just like this one. You'll notice that the export is currently pending. If you click the refresh wheel at the top, you should move you through here. I don't have that many users under me. Why is it taking so long? It's usually a little faster than this. There we go. You'll get a note that says complete and your file is ready for download. To access that export file, click the download file link on the same page. And you'll notice my export is downloading below here. So once it's downloaded, you can click to open the file. And you can see all of the users and their authorized organizations and roles, the active begin date. You'll notice that it does also have the disabled button on it. If you wanted to create a new user ID or make updates to the export to use within bulk, you can do it through this process. If I wanted to create a new user ID using the export import process, I could populate the fields. We're going to give this person Proctor permissions. So once you've made the changes that you want to your file, you're going to go to File and Save as a CSV, which we have. That's good. And then save that file. And then you can close the file. And going back into Pearson Access Next, you can exit tasks from that. And back in the import export data screen, from the select task dropdown, you're going to want to again select import export data and click the start button. In the type dropdown, this time instead of user export, you're going to select user import. You're going to want to navigate out to the file that we just saved and select open. And then click the process button. And looks like I received some errors. And it looks like I actually forgot to fill out a field, but this walks you all through the process. So what I would do is I would just go to my file and refer to the error messages that I received, fix them, resave, making sure that it's a CSV file, and trying to import the file again. But I hope that so as you saw how I ran that export and how I had all my users on there, that would be how you could have a good view of all the users regardless of deleted or disabled status within your organization. So hopefully that answered that question of where you can go to see all the users.
Tyler, there's a question about when people go in to enter a user, so they search for somebody and the name doesn't show up, and then they go again to enter it, and then it will say this user already exists. But when they search for it, then the user doesn't show up. I've come across that when a user is disabled. And so I create the account and it says, oh, just kidding, there's an account already here. Then I need to go and check and see if it's been enabled or disabled, if the account, what the account status is, and then make that change before they will show up when I search for them again.
That's correct.
There may be more to that, but that's what I found works in those situations and when I'm looking.
Yeah. Let's see here. So if I wanted to disable this user, okay, so I've disabled that user, and then so like we were saying, if we went to create, if you weren't finding them, you wanted to create this person again as a teacher. It's just sitting right there. Let's see. So as you can see, you get a success. Oh, this user already exists. The requested roles and organization assignments have been added to this user. As you select that user, it would show up in the list just like this, and you can see that their account status is currently sitting in disabled. This is where you could re-enable them right here. Make sure you save your changes, and then if you exit out tasks, that person will now be showing in the list. And I hope I'm not confusing what you were saying, Rebecca. This is what I felt like you were saying, and that is the process to re-enable that user.
Tyler, really quick, I think there's a couple more questions here. I just want to make sure we've got them covered.
Yeah.
One of them is, do they have to enable every teacher one at a time? And I believe that is the case unless they do the export-import process, correct?
Through Pearson Access Next within the user interface, you would have to do it one by one. The only way to do it in bulk is through the export and import process that we demonstrated through that file.
Maybe just to jump in and kind of rephrase that a little bit. The user interface, and you'll find this is true when you're working with student PMP accounts and all kinds of things. User interface is really a one task at a time place. If you want to bulk upload, for example, users or user status changes, or eventually when we talk about accommodations, other things, you'll use the process where you export a file directly from the website, make your changes, and then re-import it back in. And that's how you can do bulk or batches of things. So just think one at a time is within the user interface, but if you want to do groups of things, then it's through the CSV, export a file, change it, import it, and then apply those changes. So question, so you can enable everyone on the CSV file and import it, and all the users will be updated to enabled. And that's my understanding. Tyler or Cyril or Don, if there's anything.
That's correct. Through the import file is where you would want to enable them all at once.
That's right, Rebecca. So if you're setting up a bunch of users, I think you may want to take the CSV import-export approach initially. But then if you have onesie-twosies that you need to do changes to, or at the beginning of the year you need to enable them, then doing it online may work faster for you.
And there's also a question that asking if they can do bulk accommodations here as well. I think that's a different export import that we'll be touching on in a little while, I believe.
Yeah, we'll be focusing on import and export for a lot of the features that we'll be displaying today. Okay, I'm not seeing the chat. Do we have any more questions currently? Okay, so we covered all the import and export process for users. We did have a slide here to give you guys the opportunity to practice a user role creation and also exporting and importing. There is a QR code on the screen that you can scan with your phone that give instruction, step-by-step instruction for example, for both of those that you can use. So we'll give you all just a couple minutes to play through Pearson Access Next. If you have any other questions, just let me know. But we'll plan to move to the next section here in just a minute or two.
Tyler, there's a question in the chat about changing an email. Do you want to talk about like if there's a typo or if there's something that maybe comes up in an email needs to be changed?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I believe once that initial user is set up, we would just go back in and create a new user. Sorry, just 1 second here. So if you go into create and edit users and click start, you would just create that account there. You can also, if I'm not mistaken, let me just try this real quick. Yeah, so you can see that once you have that initial login created, that field is static. It's not an editable field. So you would have to create a new user account.
Hey, Tyler.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in, but we do allow the emails to be updated. We just don't allow you to update your email ID that's associated with your account. So if you're logged in as a user, you don't allow you to update the email account. But so if you have a teacher, you probably want to reach out to your administrator and they should be able to update the email associated with that account. That's a pretty primary one for us. So there's some controls on what we don't want users to make mistakes on that. I don't know if that answers the questions.
Cyril, I'm not sure that anybody actually has access to update the emails because I know on my state role, I can't update them either. And I see that Crystal said she is the administrator and it doesn't allow her to update them.
I can check on that, Rebecca. I know it's permission based and it's possible that we have not set it up for the Utah site. So I can look into that further.
Yeah, it looks like it's a universal responsive, unable to update email addresses. So Cyril, yeah, you can look in.
I just had to create a new user and take out the old user to change the emails.
Yeah. So Cyril, if you wouldn't mind looking into that, and then we can follow up with that at our next meeting. And then as far as for everybody on this training goes, I'll send out information about that in the next assessment director memo and in the newsletter.
I'll do that, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thanks, Cyril.
Okay, did everybody get a chance to either download this the exercise sheet and get a chance to create a user?
And also just, this is Dawn at Pearson, and just to clarify too, I think I did see a couple questions, and I think Tyler, you've said that, but this is a reminder that if you do have to add users both to the training site and the production site. It isn't automatically, one doesn't load into the other. I mean, you can do the export import process, but just wanted folks to be aware of that.
That's correct. So the two sites are independent of each other. So. All right, I think we'll go ahead and keep moving on. Next thing we kind of want to talk about is it's another task for administrators, and that is to verify your students' registration and group test assignments in the operational site. Just again, a note, we will be using sample data created for the infrastructure trial in the training center to complete training on the following tasks. So just to talk a little bit about how that data comes into the system, Utah's UTREC system is actually linked to a product called OneRoster, which is linked to our Pearson Access Next system. And then on a nightly basis, data flows from Utah's UTREC system through that OneRoster to Pearson Access Next. The API data points can't be managed through Pearson Access Next. Changes to the data need to happen within UTREX, and then changes would be reflected in Pearson Access Next within 24 hours. Loads have already been happening for the Spring 21 administration, and you can log in to Pearson Access Next, the live site, to verify your students. To view a list of students, you can navigate to through the students section, which I'm going to show you on Pearson Access Next right now. So logging into Pearson Access Next, you would go to the home site. And again, within the setup dropdown, you can see the students option. And this is where you can find a list of users underneath your organization. If you're not seeing any data, you may need to select the blue down arrow next to the search button. And if you select show all results, you should be seeing your student data. Again, all of my student information that you're seeing right here is for sample students. So. You can also verify student information using that export and import process that we've shown for the users. This time it would just be for the students. So again, if we come back to the home site, if you want to see that process, you can again select the action dropdown and select import export data again. And within the task dropdown, you're going to select import and export data and click the start button. From the type dropdown, this time you're going to select student registration export. And then click the process button. And again, we can click the refresh wheel to see an update on the status of our file. And as you can see, our file is now ready for download. You can click the download file link again on the screen. And you can see my student registration export is downloading. Opening up that file, you can see all of my student data within this export. So again, all of your student data needs to be managed through UTREX though. This one you would not use an import process to make modifications to any student data. All of that needs to happen within UTREX. And then again, all your information will be updated within 24 hours within Pearson Access Next. But this is a good way in bulk to go ahead and view all of your student registration information.
Tyler, there's a request to show that one more time.
Yep, through the UI or through the export process.
The request is show all that one more time.
Yes, you got it. I will do it. So coming in from the home site in the setup, in the action dropdown, we have the students option. So selecting students, And then as you can see, you will receive the list of all the students under your organization. If you're not seeing that list, you can click to show all results that may not be selected. And so here's, as you can see, I have 8 pages of students that you can flip through, so you can also navigate through here. If you're looking through, for a specific student, you can do a search on that person, on their last name here. You can also use the filter box to filter by state student ID. So if I put a student ID here, it'll just return the one student that I'm looking for. To see your student registration through export import, again coming in from the home page, if you select action dropdown and select import export data, and then from the task dropdown, we're going to select import export data again and click the start button. From the type dropdown, you're going to select student registration export and click the process button. And then once your file is complete, you can select the download file link. And once you have your file, you can open it up, and then this is a good way you can verify your student's registration information is correct as well.
I'm just going to jump in really quickly and address a couple of questions that have come up about students. All students will populate into the blue live site from Utrex automatically. So you won't be importing, creating, anything like that for, actually let me put an asterisk by that. We'll talk about times where you might need to move students, but you won't be creating them. For the brown site where we're doing kind of the sandbox, this is where you can go and try everything out and you don't have to worry about messing anything up. You'll actually create fake students. So you'll build some sample students, and Tyler will walk us through that in a little while. But so you won't see your actual students in the brown training site. They'll only populate in the live blue site. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. All right, so I went into the live site and I can see some students that aren't here, and I know they're populated through Utrex, so how do we address that?
Yeah, if you have students where your Utrex information isn't correct, I would talk to whoever your Utrex coordinator is for the school and say,
So how do I find out if they're correct or not? Because they're in the SIS correct, so I'm wondering why it's not populating over to Utrex. We're not showing that as any errors in Utrex. I don't know.
Yeah, that will be something that's on the school side. And there is a Utrex help desk that they can contact and say, hey, our SIS system has this information. It's correct. Where's this miscommunication between our SIS and Utrex? And then they can help troubleshoot that. We just take whatever's in Utrex and use that.
Okay, all right.
So,
I just was wondering because I'm over the Utrex too, so I didn't know where I needed to go to fix that. Okay.
Yeah, so Lorraine, I'd just reach out to the Utrex help desk and say, this is what I'm seeing. Can you help me troubleshoot? And you should be able to do that.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Sorry.
No worries. I'm sure other people have those same questions. And if there was a magic Utrex button, we would share it with everybody. I haven't found that button yet. Let me see, Tyler, if there's any other. Okay, I think we may be caught up on questions.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah, that's good. We did put while we were discussing, we put the exercise slide for with the QR code again. So hopefully everybody had a chance to, go in and do a search on their student registrations and play with that. Again, we'll have step-by-step directions on how to perform those tasks within that QR code or the URL on the screen to perform those tasks. So moving into the next topic, kind of feeds into what Rebecca was stating, how your students will not be within the training site. So we're going to review steps to set up your local infrastructure trial in that training site, and then this is also this next session will allow us to create sample data for use in the rest of this training session. So as you saw, I had all of my sample students that were generated in the training site. We're going to walk you through the steps how to create those. Again, no live data will be within the training site. So to walk through that process, let's go back over to Pearson Access Next, and coming from the home site, again, we're going to go to that setup drop down and select students again. So from the students menu, in the task drop down, you can select the option generate sample students. And I'll leave that up on my screen here for just a second so y'all can make sure to find that in the task drop down here. Once you have that option selected, you can click start. And this will take you to the generate sample students screen. So you'll want to populate all the data in the required fields, starting with organization. And then you can select the grade of that student, which we're going to use grade 9, and then the subject. So grade 9 English is what I'm going to select. For type, you're going to want to select online. And then the number of students, you can select anything from 1 and 99 students. You're not limited to 99. We can only create 99 at a time. So right now I'm just going to select 10, but if I wanted to go and create more sample students, you can do that. But once you have all the fields, the required fields filled out, you can click the generate button. And as you can see, we got a success message that we created 10 students successfully. And once you get that message, you can click exit tasks. So depending on how many you've created already, they'll add to your list of students that you have currently sitting out here. But just some screenshots to kind of show you guys again that is sitting in the task dropdown. And then we have another exercise slide to kind of let you guys play with that, generating your sample students within the training site. Any questions on generating sample students? All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about assigning accommodations. One piece of information that you can use is our test administration manual. We have a accommodation chart in the manual that can help walk you through the assigning of accommodations for your students. All tests currently are defaulted with text-to-speech accommodation in the operational site and in the training site when creating your students in the training. So coming back over to Pearson Access Next, I'm going to kind of show you the newly designed PMP screen. there. There we go. So walking you through getting to the accommodation page, again, we're going to go to the setup and students menu. And once you're on the student screen, you'll want to select a student to which you want to assign accommodations for. I'm just going to select a few. Then within the task dropdown, you'll notice we have the student Pmp settings. So you'll want to select that option and then click start. And this will take you to the newly redesigned student Pmp settings page. So one piece of functionality that we added for this year is now you can set accommodations at the level of all subjects for your student or individual subjects. To walk you through the process for assigning that accommodation, for instance, if I want this student to have the screen reader option, I'm going to select all subjects for that student, which would assign that accommodation for every subject that that student's going to take, and then click the Save button at the top. You'll notice that I receive a warning and that warnings have occurred and see messages below. If we scroll down to where we assign that accommodation, you'll notice that the warning message tells us that we also need to select Braille materials from the Braille plus tactile graphics option below. One important piece of information is that if you set all subjects for that accommodation for that student, you will also need to select all subjects within the additional accommodation option. So we were going to select UEB Braille for that student in all subjects, and then click the Save button again. So again,
Heather, can you go back through kind of that process again? Just show where you started and then work through that again?
Yeah, sure can. So let me just get out of here again. We'll go all the way back from the beginning. From the setup drop down, go to students. Once you get to the student screen, you'll want to select the student for which you want to assign that accommodation. And in the task dropdown, you're going to select Student Pmp Settings and click the Start button. So this will take you to the Student Pmp Setting page. And again, for that student, you would want to select either all subjects for that accommodation or an individual subject. So we're going to select all subjects for right now. And then once you select that, click the Save button. And this is where I wanted to show that we had a warning message that occurred. Scrolling down below, you can see, okay, well, I selected screen reader, but if you want the screen reader, you'll also need to select the Braille materials from the Braille and tactile graphics option, which conveniently enough is right below. Again, you'll need to select all subjects for that other accommodation as well. You can't have all subjects in one and just one subject in another. So once I've selected, for instance, UEB for Braille and tactile graphics under all subjects, come back up and click Save again. Again, we still have a warning message, so let's scroll down below to see what we have. And this time it just says, warning, you must order materials through orders and shipment tracking. And so that's just telling us that, okay, well, if I want Braille and tactile graphics, I'll need to submit an order for those accommodated paper materials through our orders and shipment tracking menu, which we'll show you later on. Once you've set your,
there's a question in here from Rachel about on the student screen where you select particular students, does that checked student still stay checked after you leave the screen?
It does.
Yeah, so Rachel, that's still there. You just need to go back to unclick.
Yeah, I'll show you how to do that really quick. So if you have all of these students, as you can see on my screen, I only have 4 students checked, but I have 8 pages full of students here. So to see how many students that you have checked there, up here, you can see students 12 selected. If you want to deselect any of those students, you can just hit the clear button and you'll notice that all of those students were unchecked.
Tyler, I'm going to quickly jump in. We have a lot of people that are not seeing the PNP screen, even though they have administrator and test coordinator level permissions. So note, make sure you're in Aspire 2021. So up on the right-hand side, it should say Aspire. So you'll see Aspire 2020, Aspire 2021, and not the benchmarks. So if it says Utah Core Standards benchmarks, click on the upper right-hand side by your user and switch it to 2021.
Yeah, and I am logged in as administrator right now, so everything I'm seeing on the screen should reflect. So hopefully, if you are accidentally in the benchmarks by going to 2021 Aspire Plus, that should hopefully resolve the problem.
So Tyler, just to revisit one more time, up on the upper right-hand side of your account, so if you're looking at your screen, you'll see that there's the administration. So on Tyler's right here, there's a little bell and then a flag, and then you've got your Utah 2021. So that's where you want to make sure that it's the Aspire Plus 2021. Or if you were working with benchmarks, that's where you would switch it to benchmarks so you could see either of those two. And then right next to that, if you want to look at your account, see what your account permissions are, you can click on your user and it will tell you, like right here, Tyler, the user, his role as administrator, and he's in sample school 1. So that's kind of like a summary corner. If you're ever in there and you're like, I can't find this, go look up at that upper right-hand side and make sure that you're where you think you are in the system. Okay, I think that may have addressed those questions. If you're still having, issues or challenges, please let me know. If you are wondering how do you actually change it, just click on the date. So if yours says 1920, click on the next one that says the 20 to 21, and then click on the 2021 Utah Aspire Plus. Okay, I think we're caught up here, Tyler.
Okay, great. So now we want to talk about assigning accommodations through the import-export method. So we've just shown you how to assign an accommodation using Pearson Access Next user interface. But just like a lot of the tasks in Pearson Access Next, we can do these actions through the import-export data menu. So again, through the setup drop-down, you can select import-export data. Coming to the import-export data screen, you hit the task drop-down and again select import-export data and click the start button. Again, in the type drop-down is where we're going to select the student PNP export file. Once you've selected the student PNP export in the drop-down, type drop-down, select the process button, excuse me. You can see our file is now complete and ready for download. We'll click that download file link on the screen. And just to show you what that export looks like when we download that, you can see a lot of information on the screen. But all of my students that are listed here and their accommodations that you can set within that export file. Now, again, just like the user interface, we have, for instance, text-to-speech Spanish for all, or you can set at the individual subject level for that student. Now, again, within the manual, we have a lot of really good information for assigning these accommodations, even using the import-export method. We have a full table in that manual that will give you all the valid values and how to assign accommodations for your student within the manual. So I would refer you to that section within the manual to assign accommodations for your student. So once you've made the modifications within your file, you would again make sure that it's saved as a CSV file. And then to re-import the file, again, just to walk you through those steps, from the task dropdown, select Import Export Data and click Start. Now from the Type dropdown, you're going to select Student PNP Import. You would navigate to your modified Excel CSV file, and then you would click the Process button. Sometimes the import's a lot slower than the export as that data is being loaded to Pearson Access Next. So if you have errors on your file, you would go back to your CSV file and make those requested changes and then go through that import process again. Once your file is done processing, you can exit tasks to go back to the import-export menu. And here we have just another exercise slide to give you guys some time to kind of look at that within the training site. Noting that all features probably aren't going to work for all the accommodations as we are in the training site and not in the live site. Any questions on navigating out to the PMP site or downloading that file, the export file?
There's a question. It says, you imported the file back into PA Next without changing anything. Why did it show errors?
When I did export that, it was asking for a last modified field. I didn't populate that column, and it is a required field within the export.
Then another question, do accommodations need to be approved by anyone? And maybe I'll answer this one because this question's come up a few times, especially when we're talking about this, as it's related to the ACT. So ACT accommodations go through an accommodations request and approval process for ACT, but with Utah Aspire Plus, these are determined locally. And so it'll be up to each school to and district to decide, who's inputting those. Is it a special education coordinator? Is it the special ed teacher? Is it the general ed teachers? How do you want to set that up within your school and within your district? There are a few accommodations that require enabling at the state level. For example, uses of assistive technology, things that we have to set at the state level. But for the vast majority of accommodations and supports are handled locally. So as far as that, to summarize the answer to that question, did they need to be approved by anyone? It's your local process. So whatever you're doing at your school site. Another question, can you do an individual, not a bulk accommodation for Spanish? Are we talking about an upload on that? So you can set this accommodation student by student in the user interface where Tyler was a little while ago on that, the page where you can click, do you want this to apply to all tests or just some tests? Or you can do it through the spreadsheet. See another question, where will the training be posted? So this training will be posted on our illustrious YouTube channel. It's viral. Everybody wants to watch training videos. So it's the USBE assessment YouTube channel. The slides will be posted on the resource center. I'll put the links to those in the chat.
Are there any other questions on the accommodation assigning?
I think there's still a question on can you do an individual, not a bulk accommodation for Spanish? So I don't know if we want to just go on that screen and show a Spanish example. Yeah.
Let me pull up in here. So going back through students, and then if we were to select this student and go through the student PMP settings and click start. If you'll notice, in the past we've notated that you're currently an English TTS form. Now all of that is defaulted. There would be no selection there. And so within embedded supports, we have the text-to-speech Spanish option for those students. So here's where you could select either all subjects to be in Spanish or individually. And then you would just select save. And again, I'm throwing errors only because I'm in the training site.
Yep.
So that is how you apply. And there's, I didn't cover all the accommodations, more just the assigning of those. Again, you can refer to the accommodation section within the manual, and that'll help you assign all of the accommodations that we offer, which if you can see the screen, we have a lot of options for you all.
Tyler, there's another question about, so we don't have to deselect anything this year for Spanish. So last year you had to take off the English text-to-speech if you were adding Spanish.
That's correct. We've made it a lot easier. So just kind of like to reiterate, last year there was that English TTS check option on this page. This is newly more streamlined, I would say, now, and a lot more easy to use, I think. So now you can just select the options to which you want for your test. Including this all subjects checkbox, which is great because it'll automatically assign that accommodation for all the students' test assignments.
Tyler, one other question that's come up. We said, I noticed that the live site, the PNP, is not showing up. Is that because it is not yet available? That's
correct. We do not have that window open within production at this time. And I would need to check the our schedule of events or the feature dates, Rebecca, to get that date. I don't have the date in front of me, unfortunately.
Tyler, do you still have your export spreadsheet up?
I don't, but I can just get it really quick.
There's just one that show where all the different tests show up on that file.
Sure.
It's
So-
just it's a very, what do we want to say, a wide file, I think is the
Yeah.
terminology. There's a lot of fields to look at.
So that's a great, it's a great point though, because I can show you another piece of functionality here. So if you come to the import export data screen, you'll notice that I have a list of files here that I've run in the past. Underneath my ID here on the right, you can see that I ran all of these. But just recently at 3:18 your time, I ran the student PMP export. So if you put a check mark next to that file, within the task dropdown, you can just view file details and then click the start button. Here you can just access that exact file that I ran again and just download it from here. So instead of running a whole new one.
Tyler, I want to jump in really quick with a question that came directly to me, but I think it's important to clarify.
Sure.
So one question that came up is about home administration. And home administration is not the same thing as remote administration. So home administration is for students that are on home and hospital. And that's the place that they are receiving special education services. It's not the same as home for COVID. So we don't allow remote, any kind of remote testing for Utah Aspire Plus or for the ACT. So I know that especially this year has been an area with a lot of questions, but I just wanted to make sure that distinction is clear.
And so going back to where you're seeing all of those accommodations, here you can see the student's SSID is the first column. So each one of these is an individual student within your file. Now moving across, the row for that student is where you would set all the different accommodations. So at the top of the file, you can see the header row is all of the different accommodations. And for instance, this screen reader functionality for all English, reading, math, and science. So here is where you would make the modification if you wanted this for all subjects, or you would mark this as a Y instead. And again, that would need to be so for instance, when I showed you in the user interface that screen reader also required the Braille, then you would have to go over and mark that as well within the Braille and tactile graphics for all. But again, we have a nice table that would walk you through these steps within the manual.
Another thing that I think would be good to bring up is that we have on all these import and exports, there's different values sometimes that are used. Is it a yes, no? Is it a 1, 0? What's the accepted value? And Tyler and his team have been putting together some documents that have all the accepted values for each of those. And Tyler, are those already on? I can't remember.
They haven't been posted yet.
Okay.
We hope to do it very, very shortly. And so that right now we have the accommodation one within the manual, but all of the layouts will be posted to the resource center.
So as you're going and you're wondering, oh, what do I put in this field? You'll be able to just pull that up. The PNP one is built into the TAM because that's one that we want people to have quick access to because it's commonly used. Any other import-export ones will be available on the Resource Center. So that's another new feature for this year. Let's see, Tyler, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through in the chat.
Okay, great. Well, then we're going to move into test sessions next. Talk about test sessions for your administration. Whoop, excuse me. So note again, for the Summit of Administration, students will be automatically loaded and placed in a session based off your grade and subject, for instance, grade 9 math in your school. The following slides I'll be showing for loading the sample students in training won't be what you'll experience in production environment, but will familiarize you with functionality regarding session management. All students must be in a test session. Test sessions are virtual groupings of students who will typically take the same test at the same time in the same location. There are multiple tasks involved with test sessions, starting with creating a test session. Should you want to move your students to smaller sessions from the larger ones that they're automatically loaded into, you can do that. So for instance, we've talked about the students being loaded through Utrex. They'll come into those auto-generated sessions, but sometimes people would like to break them out into a smaller session. So we're going to walk you through the creation of that test session so that you can move those students into a smaller session. And then once you ensure students are in the correct session, you'll be able to print your student testing tickets. And then the next step is to prepare that session. And after the session has been prepared, you'll be able to start and monitor your test session. And then finally, after all students are in a complete or marked complete status, the test session can be stopped. So I'm going to walk you all through the process to creating that session to put your students into. We're going to walk through that in Pearson Access Next again. So back from the home page for Pearson Access Next, we're now going to access one of the a new menu for today, the testing menu. And if we select the action drop-down for testing and select sessions, you'll see a list of sessions, sample sessions that I've already set up are loaded in here. But to walk you through the creating of that session, let's select the task drop-down again. And you'll notice we have the create and edit session button. So if you check next to that, click the start button, and this will take you to the create session page. Since I created students for grade 9 English earlier, I'm going to create a session for that. And we're going to call this grade 9 English sample. Let me just do 5 designation. My organization, as you can see, is already populated within that dropdown. Next, you need to assign the test to that session, which again, we're going to use grade 9 English. You'll need to give it a scheduled start date, and I'm just going to give it today's date. You'll see that form group type is assigned main because we are testing, the main form. That's what we're going to have. You'll need to talk with your testing site coordinator to determine whether or not you have a pre-cached computer to select. They could help you populate this information within the creation. For today, I just use a sample school caching computer. And then once you have all of the required information populated, you can click the create button. And as you can see, I receive a green success changes saved message at the top of the screen. And now in the session list on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see my session on the screen. One field I want to call you to after you create your session, you'll notice that we have a new field for password. This allows you to customize your password field for your session prior to starting that session. If you do that, you need to make sure that any of those changes happen prior to you preparing a session, which we'll cover preparing a session in a little while. But if you do modify that field, that needs to happen prior to that being prepared. So we have our session created. I'd like to cover also loading some students into the session from this screen. You'll notice down at the bottom, we have a student search field here, and it says add students to session. If we type in there, you can see that all of the sample students that I created that are available to be loaded into the session are in this list. So if you wanted to add a student here, you can do that. So adding them, you can see that that student is now within the student field. You would just need to click the save button after you did that. And then now scrolling down, you can see that we have that student in this session. We're going to cover more ways to get students into your session, but I just wanted to cover it on this screen while we were here. So exiting the task, coming back to the session screen, you'll notice that we have our session here at the top. You can see details about this session on the screen, that it's currently sitting in not prepared status, the scheduled start date, and the test that's assigned, and you can even see the number of students that I have within that session. Is there any questions on creating your session?
Tyler, can you
Yes.
run back through it again one more
Yes.
time?
Yeah.
And some people are commenting about not having functionality to add students into sessions as well.
That would be a permission-based activity, so it would depend on their user credentials. But we could verify against the role matrix on why they might not be seeing that.
And then maybe just with the sessions, just back up one more and just you have to create the sessions, or excuse me, create the students. So I got to generate sample students in the training site, not in the live site. They'll be populated just in the training site.
That's
maybe
correct.
Step through that whole sequence one more time.
Of creating the sample students as well?
Just touch on it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So so coming back just to students really quick here, we generated all these sample students earlier. Again, for the live site, your student data will already be preloaded. For your infrastructure trial purposes or question samplers, you'll generate those sample students like we showed in that task dropdown. So once you have your students there, they're not currently sitting in a session. So all of your students that you just generated should be available to add to that session. So once you have your students created, then you can walk to the testing dropdown and select sessions. And then just to walk through the creation of that session again, if you go to the task dropdown and select create edit sessions, then click start. Then here is where you would enter in all the required information. So right now, I'll just go ahead and change it up for adding it to grade 9 math, because I do have students out there for that. Then you would select the same subject from the test assigned dropdown, the scheduled start date. Main would be your form group type for this. And then again, you would need to talk to your testing technology coordinator to determine whether or not you would have a pre-caching computer assigned to you. Once you have that, all the required information for session creation, you can click the create button. And we receive the success message at the top. And then you can see that our session is here. You can also reset your password at this point if you don't want to use that as your password. You can do this prior to you preparing that test session, which again we'll cover in a little while, preparing that test session. And then just from this screen, if you're not able to use add students at this level, it's most likely a user permission issue. But here is where you would assign it if you do have access to do so, and then click save.
Tyler, is there a way to add more than just one at a time?
Yes,
Say it's
there
all
is. Yep,
created.
there is. So even on this screen, again, I'm going to show you other ways to add students, but from this screen, you can just keep going and selecting as many students into this box as you want. And then you would just click save again. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, you'll notice that we added 4 in a row right there.
There's a couple of comments where people said they don't have the option to add students, but they do have the correct permissions on their accounts. I know one thing that I've seen is if I set up an account for 9th grade students, let's say I generated a whole bunch of 9th grade students and I'm trying to add them into a 10th grade test session, it won't allow me to do that.
That's correct. Not even just grade, but also subject, because we created these sample students under the grade 9 math and or grade 9 English. So if I set up a session, it has to be specific to that grade and subject, or else those students won't show as available to add to this session.
Let's see, another person said they're struggling to create a session. Let's see, and then Hillary pointed out, at first I thought it wouldn't allow me to add students, but then I realized my sample students were in my 2020 training site. So when I switched the year and created students for 2021, now there are students available to add. So again, make sure that administration year is matching. Tyler, do you want to point out where, when you're creating sample students, where people need to attend to that?
Yeah, so again, for this year, you'll want to make sure that you are in the Utah Aspire Plus 2021 administration, and where you're generating those sample students is back within the setup menu and under students. And then within the task dropdown is where you have the option to generate sample students. So once you have that selected, you would click the start button, and here is where you would again see you assign those students a certain grade and test when you're creating them. So your session that you create needs to be the exact same thing. And then you can assign anywhere from 1 to 99 sample students at a time. And then once you do that, just select the generate button. I'll just create one just so y'all can see. Any other questions on sessions and getting those sample students into a session?
I'm not seeing anything else
That's great.
popping up in the chat.
Yeah,
Let me just scan through.
Just a little note too. So this process is pretty similar to the scenario of which, if you want, again, I just wanted to call it out because if you are in the live site and as we stated earlier, all your students are brought into one session for grade subject for your school. If you did want to break them out, for instance, by a classroom session, the session creation process would be the same within the functionality. So even though we're using test data, right here, the click process through Pearson Access Next is very similar to that for the live site within training. So this is a good way for you just to practice creating that session. And then we're going to also cover moving students into, right now we've added students, but there's a way to move students, which we'll cover shortly here, moving those students into a session that we've created.
Hey, Tyler, there aren't any new questions that are coming up on the chat. So
Okay,
let's
yeah.
continue.
Fantastic. So the next thing I'd like to show you within sessions is a menu that is called Students in Sessions. So this is a way that you can get access to, for instance, your student testing tickets. So I'd like to show you a couple ways that we can kind of navigate out to that students in session screen. So from this session screen, we have a little shortcut built into Pearson Access Next to, for instance, get to that screen. So we've got the grade infrastructure trial, grade 9 English session right here. And so you would select that. And then if you notice this link at the top next to sessions, it says go to students in sessions. So you select that link. And as you can see, it shifts us over to the students in sessions screen. And once we go to students in sessions screen, you'll notice that now that link says go to sessions. This is because we do a lot of back and forth between these two screens. But coming into the students in session screen, you'll notice that my session that I selected on the previous screen now shows in the session list. If you select that, all of a sudden I'm going to get a lot of information added to the screen once I select that, including all of the students that are currently sitting in that session. Some more information on here is the student test status. For instance, you know, I have a student who is currently sitting in a completed status or exited or they're ready to test. Anyway, this has a lot of good information on this screen. Now, to access my students' testing tickets for the day of testing, you can do this a couple ways as well. You can select individually. If I know that I just want the testing ticket for this student, I would just select it and then go to this resources drop-down menu right here in the upper right-hand corner. And if you see, it says right here, student testing tickets, and we can either print all for this session, which would print out all the student testing tickets in that session, or we could just print the selected testing ticket for that student. And as you can see, when I selected that, it loaded the student testing ticket to my screen, and here you can select different formats for which you want to print that student testing ticket. So let's see here, coming back into my slides. So before we start that student with that testing ticket, just some information is that a session must be prepared, started, and unlocked before that student is able to log into their test or the infrastructure trial if that's what you're conducting. So we can also show you that those steps as well. We're going to cover this detail more in a little bit here for sessions as well. So but for right now, we have an exercise just to create those sessions. So if you guys haven't had a chance to do that yet while I've been presenting, feel free to start doing that through the instructions that we have on that QR code, and just let us know if you have any questions.
And Tyler, as people are working, there was a question regarding the printing of the test tickets by each subject. So the testing tickets are unique to that particular grade and subject, correct?
That's correct. It's just for that session that we're currently sitting in. So the session I was displaying was for a grade 9 English session that I created. That testing ticket is only for that session, and that will be the exact same functionality within the live site. Your student will still be in a session devoted to that subject and grade, so your session will only be for that one session.
And is there a way to make the test ticket smaller?
Yeah, so there's a few view options here. I can go back and show. That's a good question, actually. So let's go ahead and just select all my students here within my session. And going back to the resources dropdown, we have print all for this session. So let's go ahead and show that. So there is, we have the different print formats, but if you have a bunch of students within your session, here's where you can say, okay, well, I want these set up in a grid view. So as you can see, that prints out the ticket a lot smaller if you wanted to make that ticket smaller, and then you would have to just cut along the edges for that ticket. One kind of, I thought, creative way to do the printing, though, that we've talked about in the past in other trainings, is that if you do print out in the one per page view, when you print it out, each student will have only their ticket information on their ticket, but they'll get a whole back side of the paper or the page and the front side with that information to use as scratch paper during their test. So we've talked about in the past how one per page is a good option in the sense that they get a piece of scratch paper to go along with it. So.
Tyler, another question is there a way to print all the testing tickets for one student, or they're each? No.
You can, the one thing you can do, oh wait, I'm sorry, yes. So if we go back to the sessions page here, within, so if you have, for instance, if you can see, I have all my sessions, you can select all sessions, and a new feature that we actually do have in the task dropdown is generate the test tickets. Now, it won't be for the individual student, but at the organization level with all those sessions, it'll print out all the testing tickets at once. So if we do that, here's a way that you can print all the test tickets for every session that you have currently. So there is a little way to do, mass printing for sessions for the student. It's not at the student level, though, unfortunately.
Okay, another question is, as folks are working on this, let's see, let me find it now. Can sample students only be placed in one session, or do they need to make it, or to have additional students for the other sessions?
Yeah, unfortunately, within the sample or the training site, when you are generating those, it's only one at a time for the subject and grade level. So unfortunately, you will have to, unless no, yeah, you'll generate it by the grade and subject level only. So if you wanted some for grade 9 math, you would do it separately.
Somebody did say in the chat that they were able to choose grade 9 and grade 10 at the bottom of the list when creating sample students and then assigned to all 4 tests by grade level.
Go back and look at that. I'm not aware of that. Yeah, they might have to call that out because this is the only screen I know for generating sample students within a grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jen is saying no, for the test, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the test drop-down menu.
I think I'm probably just confused on what we're talking about, Don. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. If we're talking about generating sample students, then that's the way I know. I don't. If we're talking about something different, though, I'm not.
It says instead of grade 9 English, you can see just grade 9 or just grade 10 in the test drop-down menu at the very bottom. So if you go down to the test,
Oh, back in sample students. Yeah, let's see. Oh, okay, here. All right. Well, there you go. Say one. Unfortunately, since I have so many students created, I won't be able to see the new ones. So if she's saying that that's one way to create all 4 subjects, then that's pretty handy. So here we go. So I can cover that again really quick if anybody wants to see that shortcut. So if we select Generate Sample Students and click Start, again, you'd select your organization, grade 9, and then instead under Test in this dropdown, it looks like we have now options to select per grade. And then you could select the number of students that you want and click Generate. So I assume that that feature is adding them to all 4 subjects now. So thank you for finding that. That's great.
right? And I think one of the other questions, is there a more efficient way to get all tickets for all sessions for each student on one page? And I think we've talked about, because they're session specific, that we're not able to get it at a student level.
Yeah, I'm not currently aware of a way to do that.
Yeah, Don, that is true, and there is no plans to go down that direction as well. Really, the student is not typically expected to take those 4 tests together. So as a session is administered, say today afternoon, if the plan is to have an English test session where you have 10 or 15 students planning to test for English, the tools we have in place are to try and print all of the testing tickets for those 15 students, so you can hand them off. They can take the test for that science test session, and they have what they need to log into the test. Now the math test may happen at another time, and that student will be with another group of students when they are taking the math test. So as a product, the test session, the testing tickets that we have the print functionality for is never geared towards combining it at the student level, because we don't see the use for that at the student level.
Right, and the testing tickets are secure. If they don't test on that particular day, say they're sick, they test on a different day, they don't have to reprint the test ticket. It is good for that entire test, correct?
I missed that question. I'm sorry, Don.
So there is a question out there that what if the student does not test on a particular day, will they have to generate new tickets?
No. Once your student testing ticket is generated, that ticket will use as long as your session is not stopped. So you can still use that testing ticket.
I think Stephanie has a good question that's related to what Michelle had asked about. Is there a way that we can actually create and compile all these tickets in a simple way? So just to go back, for the summative test, your students are populated into 4 big sessions by grade level. So one gigantic, well, I guess it's as gigantic as your school is. So it could be gigantic, but one large test session for math, 9th grade math and 10th grade math, 9th grade English, 10th grade English. And then from there, the option that you have is to leave them in that session, which a lot of LEAs do and like it that way. Or you can split them into to smaller sessions. And we'll talk about the spreadsheet for doing that in just a minute. But if you move students into smaller sessions by classroom, by teacher, however you want to do that, that is an option. And then you can print by tickets by that session. If you keep your students in one large session, then the session will contain everybody that is in that session. I see a note on here from Kathy. She says, I had success by creating all of the sessions that I needed and then printing tickets by session. And then she just printed them for the proctor. So when we're talking about session creation, and Tyler, is that the next place we're going?
Actually, next we're talking about moving students into a session.
Okay.
And then we talk about the brand new, like as you were stating, doing it by a spreadsheet.
Okay. So when we talk about that, let's maybe incorporate, some of the different ways that we've seen LEAs, break sessions up and use sessions. We can share some of the things that we've seen that have worked well. And maybe some of the participants can share things that they've done that worked well that other people may want to know about. So maybe after that, when we get to that session where you're talking about the spreadsheet.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I just want to talk about some other session tasks. That now that you've got your session created, or you want to move your students out of that session into a smaller session like we've talked about, we're just going to kind of talk through some of those. But also really wanted to talk about some of the test session status descriptions. And those are on the screen. We've got not prepared, which is the initial status of a session when a session's created. Preparing, that's when a session is in queue for form assignment. We've got the ready status, which means all forms have been assigned to the session. In progress is a session that is active and the students are testing. And then we've got the stopped status, which is all testing is complete and students cannot be added to the session at that time. We also had the errors not prepared, and this one we would recommend you contact Pearson support for assistance if you encounter that status. So let's talk about adding students to that session, and then from the session screen, and then we can cover moving as well. So switching back over to my session screen in Pearson Access Next. If I select a couple, let me select a couple options here. Here you can notice in the task dropdown, we've got the Add Remove Students and Sessions button here. So if we select that and click Start, this is another way that we can add students. As I was saying, we've got a couple ways that you can get your students in there. And just like before, you can do a search for students in that box, selecting multiple if you want. As you can see, as you're adding them into that box, they start populating within a list here. So we could select all of those students, and then once you have them selected, you will click Save. And as you can see, they were added to our assigned student list below. So once you've done that, exit the task here. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about, like I said, moving those students into that session. So clicking on that Students and Sessions link again at the top of the screen, you can see I've got a session list here populated with multiple sessions, all for the grade 9 English subject. So if we wanted to, for instance, move a student from one session to another, we could select this session that has 3 students in it, for instance. What you can do is, so for instance, if this were your session where you had all your students loaded, but I want to move them into a session that we created, which could be this one, we would select the student that you want to move, or even multiple students. And within this task dropdown, you can see that we have this option for moving students between sessions. Selecting that option and then clicking Start. You can see it takes us to the Move Students Between Sessions screen. And as you notice, we have both of the students that we selected and a grayed out check mark, which notates what session that student's currently residing in. But I know I want to move them into this session. So you would select the student's checkbox underneath that session and click the Move button. Exiting this task. You can see now in the session we had selected those students in. There's only one student in there. And then going to this session that we did, you can see our 2 new students sitting in that session. So those are just like some important tasks that 2 important tasks that you can use within session, getting students into those sessions. So we just displayed this one. Now going to talk about a new feature in Pearson Access, which allows you to perform session tasks like creating a session or moving your student from one session to another using that import-export method. This is new technology that will come out in the next release of Pearson Access, which will be available in February. I won't be able to demonstrate the actual functionality on the site today, but the process really works very similar to some of the other tasks that we've shown you today through that import and export process, where you would go and download that export file off of that import-export data screen. And then you would make modifications to your file, including now you'll be able to make updates like the session name would be blank for students that currently weren't sitting in test sessions. But to move these students into a test session, you would just populate, for instance, a session name in that column of the export. And then if the populated session name doesn't exist in the system, this would be one way that you could create that session in the system. So if I say I want Johnny to be in grade 10 English, Mrs. Smith's class as my session name, and that session isn't currently in the system, it would automatically create the session and put Johnny in that class, in that session. So once you would make the modifications to that CSV file, again, you would save it as a CSV, and then we would go through that import process that we've shown for some of the other tasks and functions. So Rebecca, that is kind of what I have for sessions right now. We do talk about the monitoring of sessions later, but again, if you wanted LEAs to talk about you know, successes that they've had or ways that they can do it, now would be a good time.
Yeah. So, you know, I'd love to hear, you know, if there's somebody who's got something that they did when we did this last 2 years ago and said, you know, this worked really well. We've seen from when we went and did site visits and got to get some feedback from people, we've seen different ways that all worked well in different situations. So I'll just share the 3 main ones that I've seen. One is where schools did a long test and a short test on 2 days. Another one was where schools just did it by subject area. So, you know, we're taking all of math this week, we're taking all of English this week, and they just did it in their regular class schedules. Last time, you may remember that the math test was 90 minutes. After doing data analysis and all kinds of things, we discovered that 90 minutes really was not needed. And so that got moved to 75 minutes, which also can help accommodate schools who are using this within a block schedule a little bit more easily than the 90 minutes did. as far as for planning purposes. So that was another way where it worked well. The third way is some schools decided to do their ACT testing and their Utah Aspire Plus testing on one day. And they ran Utah Aspire Plus in a way that was very similar to the ACT, where it was a battery schedule. So one test and then the next test. And it took the single day, but all students in the school, with the exception of 12th graders, were involved in their end of year state assessment. And so that was another way that worked. The key that I saw for any of those was effective communication. So making sure everybody knew what the plans were, how they wanted to set things up, and also getting input from their teaching staff and any of the faculty members, the staff, clear to get your kitchen people, your bus people involved if there's going to be any changes to schedules that will impact large groups of people. But that communication was really important. Can you type the times for each test here in the chat? Yes, I will put those in here in just a moment. But I'd love for maybe like Robin or Rachel or anybody who maybe had the opportunity to see things that worked well and maybe some things that didn't work as well. If you wouldn't mind just jumping in and sharing those, that would be great. Oh, and thank you, Patty, for beating me to it. So the times for the different test modules, the different test sections are in the chat now. Dan, would you mind sharing a little bit about the all-in-one that you guys did?
So we just ran it just like the ACT. I can't remember the exact order we did it in. It is a very long day, trying to squeeze it all into 6 hours and coordinate lunches and breaks and not have people on the halls all at the same time. We really thought maybe the students wouldn't enjoy the all day, just having that endurance, but they seemed to think it was good. The teachers liked it. It was less disruptive that way. We thought about doing it over 2 days last year, but the teachers were like, no, let's just keep to the 1 day. So that seems to work for us, but it is a lot of paper shuffling.
Great, thanks Dan for sharing that. Carolyn said they did 1 session per day in Salt Lake District, and that worked well. Carolyn, do you want to share anything else about that?
We just did, we had to set up our accommodations, differently. So we set most of them up on multi-day. And then we had our accommodated kids start with their regular language arts class or regular math class. And then they would end at the same time that the class period ended. And then they would just pull them out later with another group. And it took us, it seemed to work really well just to do 1 session a day, get them in, get them out. I think with the way our schedule is going to go this year, I think we're going to move it to 2 sessions a day and do a long and a short. But we're meeting with that again next week.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. It's like we've got some other people putting in different ways that they did their testing. Robin, if you want to jump in, that would be great.
Yeah, we've actually done it several different ways with our schools. Some of them do, they'll take 1 week and do late starts, a little bit of a later start, and do 2 tests each day, and then get both 9th and 10th done in the same week. Others split it out longer and do a shorter late start and do 9th grade 1 week and 10th grade the next. And that seems to have worked out well. We have had one school do it all in 1 day, which was scary. But it worked, but it was scary.
A lot of coordination.
Yeah, that is the key. The coordination is the key.
Yep. And that's what we've noticed just in site visits and talking with people is it's all about the coordination ahead of time and, that communication on who's going to do what by when and how will we know. Let's see, there are some other people who have put ideas and things that have worked in the chat. And so I think really what this boils down to is that there's a lot of different ways that you can set this up. And we built this flexibility in on purpose so that schools could choose to administer this in the way that works best for their schedules, whether that's do it in a battery and do it on the same day as the ACT and, we're going to just get it done. Or, we prefer, to scatter it throughout our schedule, whatever works the best for you. As far as any other questions, anything you guys are wondering about, looks like Sherry put in a comment about scheduling RISE testing and Utah Aspire Plus for 9th during the same week. So if you've got, for example, middle schools that are 7 to 9 instead of high schools that are 9 to 12, that's a great way to go. They can all be on the same adjusted bell schedule. Yeah, I appreciate Brett's comment. This will work better when we're back on a normal schedule. I agree. It'll be interesting to see what that normal schedule ends up really looking like over time. Actually, one note I want to add on to that, one other question that's come to the state a few times is, how are we working to accommodate schools that are in quarantine or student groups that are in quarantine? And because this test can't be administered in a remote setting, students do need to be in person to take the test. And we expanded the window. So there's now from March the 8th through May 15th. So the test can be administered at any point during that window during a school week. So obviously not like Saturday night or Sunday night, but as you're going through that, if there are students that they're here this week, but maybe they're quarantined for the next 2 weeks and then they're back, the goal is to provide as much flexibility as possible to be able to get those test sessions completed. So the test window starts March the 8th, which is in a little bit over a month from now, a month and a week and a half-ish. And then it will go until May the 15th. Yeah, and I like Dan's comment, having distance days makes it easier for juniors and seniors to stay home that day when the so maybe there are some benefits to some of the scheduling and the changes that we've had this year because of all of the COVID related issues. So it seems like, okay, Tyler, I'm not seeing any other. Oh, thank you for the clarification. May 15th is a Saturday. So it's May 14th. We're going to finish on Friday, not Saturday. So what I get for going off my memory. But I do know March 8th is the right day. Okay, Tyler, if you want to jump back in.
Yeah.
Let's talk more about sessions.
Next, actually, before we talk about the preparing and starting those sessions, I got some other tasks in between there, prior to you being able to start a session, key information that you could use. So next, I'd actually like to talk about student transfers. So when a student transfers into your school from another school within the state, the following processes must be followed. The student will not be enrolled in your organization until the student transfer process has taken place. There are two methods for the transfer. One method is using the file import-export features like we've shown prior to today to transfer multiple students at once. But first we're going to look at the manual method used for small numbers of transfer students. In previous years, if you've had a student in a separate organization from the organization that they were testing in, you've had to do an enrollment transfer to do that. This year, you have the ability to have a student belong in both a testing organization and a reporting organization, or also known as organization that they belong to. The student will still be loaded in their school in Pearson Access Next, but able to test in another. And the reports would be available in both of those organizations. Should your student require this scenario, data is still needed to be managed and set up in the UTREX system. So just walking through this process as well, that a student arrives at a new district, the administrator collects their student information, including student ID number, first and last name, and date of birth. The administrator could then go into Pearson Access Next and make the transfer request, the request of the previous administrator, and then using that student's correct ID number. This would be if the student is in a session that has been, prepared. The administrator of the student's former school district approves or rejects that transfer request in Pearson Access Next within 1 business day. The student test data would transfer to the new district, including any test attempts. And then the student would appear in a quote unquote transfer session among all the school's other test sessions. The administrator would move the student into a new test session or add them to an existing session, and then the student would then resume their testing. And then if the previous district does not respond or approve within that 1 business day, we recommend you to please contact the Office of Student Assessment to request assistance with that transfer. So that's the scenario. Now I'd kind of like to walk you through that within Pearson Access Next. I'm going to log out really quick here and log in so that I can show you between 2 districts that communication path. So from here, I'm going to go into, let me grab a student ID number really quick. I'll use this one. Okay, so copying that state student ID, I could then go to another school. And if I wanted to do a transfer request from that student, I would go to Setup, and then I would go to Work Requests. And within the task dropdown, you're going to select the Request Enrollment Transfer and click the Start button. Here's where you need that required information that we requested earlier, including the state student ID, the last name, which is sample data. Middle name is not a required field, but this is. So we plug in the date of birth, and then now we're going to click the search button, which will search the entire system of Pearson Access Next, the entire state for that state student ID. And as you can see, it found the student. And so as you see at the bottom here, we're stating change enrollment for that sample student that we're requesting is currently sitting in sample school 1, and we're requesting to change that enrollment to sample school 2. So once that information looks right, you can then click the send request button. As you can see, success, change is saved. We can click on that, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the work request status and that it's currently sitting on, in waiting for approval status. Exiting out of here, let's show you what it looks like on the other side from the district that we requested that student from. So coming back over to that student's organization. So this should have come up. Okay, so it's probably just needs to refresh maybe. Okay, well, so typically this bell icon and the upper the upper bar here, as you can see when I hover over it says work request. Typically this bell would light up red. I'm not sure why it isn't doing it right now for this scenario, but if we click on that bell, you can see that I do actually have a transfer request currently sitting in this notification up here that requires action. So you can actually just click that transfer request, and as you can see, it takes me to the find work request screen. So as you can see, the status is sitting on waiting for approval, and that the requesting organization of sample school tool is who's requesting that student. So if we want to approve that, you will select that and go to the task dropdown, and you'll select the approved or reject enrollment transfer option, then click start. This will take you to the enrollment transfer screen where you can either approve or reject that. It's probably common courtesy to notify the user on why the rejection would come through if you were to reject it. So then but we're going to approve it for today. So we will approve that. And as you can see, there are no enrollment transfers selected because we did approve it, and the changes were saved. Once you get that, you can exit tasks. And again, that you can see that we do not currently have any work requests waiting for approval. So any questions on that process? There isn't, we can show you guys how this functionality works with the import-export. It's very similar to everything that we've been showing today so far for the import and export. Again, we would go to the setup menu and select import-export data. Once you're on that page, you can select the task dropdown and select import-export data, then click start. In the type dropdown now, we're going to do an enrollment transfer export. This will give you that export file. Download your file. We don't have any information in here because you would need all of that required information that we noted earlier, including their state student ID, the last name, first name, date of birth, and then you can see the transfer from organization code, and then the transfer to organization code. So, and then you see that we have this action column. You would want to populate that with a create so that you're creating a new work request. And this is one way that you could do in bulk enrollment transfers. And so once you've made your changes, you would save your file as a CSV, and then we would go through that import process. So then we would go back and do the enrollment transfer import file, and then you would navigate to your CSV file. Any questions on that process?
Heather, I wanted to,
Go ahead, Ruth.
Don.
Yeah, I was just going to take some of the questions that we've got in the chat, Tyler.
Yeah.
Is there an email or anything that anybody gets system generated for those before the
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm doing it from my single user and I don't generally go across, but I do believe that an email is sent to both organizations. One, they would send a work request confirmation email to the requester, and then it would send another one to the requestee as well.
As long as the system has an email.
That's correct. That is correct, because it is going to the organization.
are these work requests for students who are dually enrolled and want to take the test with another school?
That is correct as well. Yes, we would. That is the scenario to which you would do a work request.
And then one other one with that would be if the test has been started and a student moves, then UTREX will not move the student because they have a live session already going. And so in that case, then a manual transfer would occur. With that, one thing you might want to consider is you can build your sessions, but I wouldn't prepare and start them until you're actually ready to administer the test. So if you build your sessions in March, but you're not going to test until midway through April, if you've already prepared and started those sessions, then anybody who moves won't be picked up because the session's already started. So what you'll want to do is build your sessions. You know, you could decide to leave them as they are in these big grade level sessions, or if you wanted to build them into smaller sessions, build those, put your students in there, just don't get it prepared and started. Because then if a student moves, then the system, UTREX, will say, oh, let's take so-and-so, you know, Rebecca moved, she's now over here. And they'll be able to move that student to the school, their new school, so that they will be available to be put into a session at the new school. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Another thing I want to point out with sessions is it's really important that you enter student accommodations before you prepare and start your sessions, because some of those accommodations are form dependent. So for example, if you're a student that has extended time, the timing is built into the test session. And so if you're in a session that's prepared and started and it's a standard time session, they've already been assigned to a form that says this is a standard time test. And so we want to make sure that they get to the type of test they need to have. And in order to do that, make sure those accommodations are set before the sessions are prepared and started. Same with if they need a Spanish test, or some of these, they're actually going to route the student to another form. The Spanish form is a different form than the English text-to-speech form. So if they need a Spanish test, they need to be assigned to that before the test is started. Let's see. Would this transfer system also be for homeschooled students that need to come to test in person? So Stephanie, I guess it depends on if the homeschooled student is homeschooled but enrolled in a public school, they're home because of COVID and they're doing online schooling, or if it is because the student is actually a homeschooled student and they're not enrolled in a public school. In that case, the steps are a little bit different because they have to be populated still through UTREX. So if you want to maybe drop in a little bit more information about that, I can help answer that question. Let's see, there's another question, when do I have to request an enrollment transfer versus just UTREX? So if you have a student who moves into your school and their records are now accurate in UTREX, they're showing up in your school, but they're not showing up in Pearson Access Next 24 hours after that, then that's when I would suspect that that student already was in a prepared session at their previous school. So it will be a matter of saying, are they populating in my test sessions or not? If you want to, you could give it an additional day. But if they're showing up in your UTREX, then I would expect to see them in your Pearson Access Next within 24 hours. If you want to be generous, you can go to 48, but I would expect to see them there. And that's when I would request that transfer if you don't. Another question, if they start at another school and we try to test them, will it let us know? So they won't even show up in your rosters. Like they won't populate in your school if they've started a session somewhere else. So when you're looking at your test rosters, let's say that Rebecca moved in, and in your UTREX, Rebecca's showing up, but she's not showing up in your test sessions, then that is an indicator that that student, that Rebecca already started a test session at her previous school. And that's when you would need to make that transfer. Also, schools who know that there are students who are leaving and they know where they're going, those records transfers have already, they're already in place, they're already moving, they can actually send a request as well. So it can be a pull and a push. Let's see. I'm just looking through here. It's a homeschool system out of Tooele. So Stephanie, you may want to check in with Deb Bushik, your district testing coordinator. She will be able to help you, I think, with those questions. Okay, I think we're caught up on questions.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to show a screenshot kind of what that looks like too. So as we discussed, once those our students are transferred, they will appear in a transfer session. This is not a valid session for them to actually test within. They would need to be moved out into another session. So, but just showing you kind of what that would look like. It will have the word transfer in it. And so if you do a search on your sessions within the filter boxes, transfer would show up, and then you could go and move those sessions as we displayed earlier into another session. Okay, next, just talk quickly about ordering and where you can locate that within Pearson Access Next to order your paper accommodated materials. The accommodated materials order window that opens up on February 15th and will go through May 12th. Paper accommodated materials will be ordered in Pearson Access Next, packed by school and shipped to that school. You can order standard print, large print, and Braille materials. Paper accommodated materials will be ordered in Pearson Access Next, then packed by that school and shipped to the school. Oops. Return shipping labels, response entry instructions, and return shipping directions will all be included in the test material kits. And then student responses were recorded in test books. The proctor enters that student response through a paper response testing form. So let's pop over to Pearson Access Next, show you where you guys can access that. Again, from the home site, you'll go to the Setup tab again, and then you will go to Orders and Shipment Tracking. In the task dropdown from the screen is where you can create and edit that order. So you would select create and then start. And then that window is not currently open, but this is the screen in which you would go to order your materials. And again, like we covered earlier, for instance, when we were setting those accommodations, there was a reminder in the system to make sure, for our example that we used, to order Braille materials. So this is where you could do that. Let's see. Is there any questions on creating an order or where to find that? If anybody needs to see it again.
None so far, Tyler.
Okay, that's great. So let's move right into verifying your online testing readiness. It's important that administrators communicate with individuals who have a part in online testing, including your technology staff. It's critical that you work closely with your technology staff to ensure successful test administration, and the technology readiness training will be recorded and available on the Utah Resource Center. And again, that training is happening on February 9th. At a minimum, here are some things administrators and staff should consider when they are setting up for online testing. including when will students test, where will the students test, what devices will students use for testing, has TestNav been installed on student testing devices, and are there any bandwidth issues at that testing location, and then will Proctor Cash be used? In order to help provide clear answers to these questions, all schools should be participating in the local infrastructure trial in February. And note, while we have covered infrastructure trial steps at a high level in this training, detailed steps are included in an infrastructure trial guide, and that can be found on our resource center. So moving right into Proctor task, we have covered the main task for administrators, but now we're going to look at some additional tasks proctors will perform in Pearson Access Next. Excuse me. So here are some tasks that proctors will be responsible for, including verifying your students in sessions, administering the test, starting that test session, monitoring the test session, resuming student tests if necessary, and stopping the test session. So next tasks we're going to cover are those tasks that are typically done on the day of testing. Again, we recommend following along in the test administration manual. This will be a great resource to help you through your administration. So after students have been verified in their sessions, the session can then be started. Administrators and proctors should decide who will start those test sessions. So we're going to talk about starting a test session. Let me pop back over to Pearson Access Next to show you this process. So again, from the home, we're going to go to the testing dropdown, and you can go there two different ways. I prefer the sessions method. So let's click on sessions. This way we can select which sessions from this screen that you can that you want to start sessions for. We're also going to so I've selected a bunch of sessions that I'm going to monitor and or work with here. So once you've selected your sessions, again, let's click that Go to Students in Session link at the top of the page. You can see within the session list, I have all my sessions that I selected. Let's go ahead and select one that is currently sitting in a not prepared status. So we've got our session not prepared. To prepare that session, you just click the Prepare Session button on the right-hand side. And as you can see, we're sitting in a waiting status. Sometimes it takes a little push, so if you click the refresh button on the right-hand side, you can do that. And you can see now that that session has been prepared, we're sitting in ready status. And we're going to talk a little bit pretty soon here about what those statuses mean. But our student below is currently sitting in ready status, as is our session. So once you've prepared that session, you can then start it as well. So you can see now my session is currently sitting in progress. And if you look at my student status, it says ready status, which means that student's test assignment has happened and it's just ready for the session to be started for that student to log in and start their test. So we showed you guys how to print off those test tickets. The next step then would be for that student to take their testing ticket and log into TestNav. They'll launch the TestNav app from their device, whether it's a desktop, laptop, or iPad. They can use that testing ticket to log in. And this is just kind of an example of what the app on your desktop would look like and the sign-in screen. So once your student's in there, we can talk now a little bit about how to monitor your test session. So let's pop back over to Pearson Access Next. We have our list of sessions already, so that process is the same. You would select a session and go to Students in Sessions to monitor that session. Going to this session, it's have a lot of students in different statuses, so it's a little more interesting for you all to take a look at. So you can see this session is currently in progress. I've got a status of all my students. I've got 7 students currently sitting in ready status. I've got 1 in a resume status. You can see the key on the right-hand side of the screen here to see what each of these colors mean in the bar. I've got 4 in a completed or marked complete status and 3 in exited. And if we scroll down, sure enough, we can see all those students in those different statuses. One way that you can monitor how your student is progressing through the test on this screen is if we were to look at a student that, I have 1 student that's currently sitting in resume status, which means that is an active status to which the student is, we can see, how they're progressing through the test. So if you click the button here that says resumed, you'll notice that the student test and item progress screen pops up, which gives you a detailed look at how many questions that student has made it through within that test. So I can see that the student has made it through 9 questions out of the 17 available on this test, and that they've answered all of those questions that, that they've visited. So that's a pretty neat little tool there. So next we can talk about, what else? Now we can talk about the student test statuses and really what they mean. So we've got the ready status, which we saw, which is the student has not yet started that test, and that if the student was assigned a test but never started, they would have that status of ready. A test session cannot be stopped until students in ready status have either been removed or marked complete, so that all students in the session have a status of complete or marked complete. The next status is resumed or resumed upload status. The student, that means that the student has been authorized to resume the test but has not yet logged back in. Active is the student has logged in and started the test. Exited status indicates that the student has exited TestNav either intentionally or unintentionally, but has not submitted their test responses. And then we've got completed, which the test has been submitted by the student through TestNav and the data has been processed. And then we've got marked complete, which is that the student has exited TestNav and will not resume the same test or has never logged back in or never logged into a test. So we already showed you guys that. So talking about resuming a student test, I can pop back over to Pearson Access Next to show you how to resume that student test. So you can see we've got 3 students currently in our session that are sitting in exited status. There's 2 ways to resume a student test. You can do it individually on the user interface by clicking that down arrow next to the exited status marker and clicking resume. Or if you wanted to do all at the same time or multiple, you would select the checkbox next to that student's test. And then up in the task dropdown at the top in the that task dropdown, you could select resume student tests. And then once you do that, you click start and it'll take you to the resume student test screen to where you could select those tests again and click resume. And as you can see, the student test status changed to resumed. That student would now be able to go back into their test session and start testing again. So now we can talk about some post-test activities after your student has completed testing, unless there are questions on the resuming.
I don't see any outstanding. I think we've answered most that are in the chat, via chat.
Great. So moving into the post-test activities, here are some post-test activities. Removing students in the ready status. You could mark a student's test complete, mark test as do not report, and then there's stopping the test sessions. And we have a description for all of these on the screen here. Marking his test complete if he or she finishes on a section other than the final section, or if you know the student will not be resuming the test at all. That would be a scenario in which you would be marking a student complete. And then another important one is the removing students in ready status. If you have a session where you have students in that ready status, they need to be removed before stopping the session. And then stopping test sessions, it provides a convenient means for ensuring that all non-completed student tests have been reviewed and resolved, for one. And then two, it cannot be stopped until all of those students are in either a completed or marked complete status. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how we can remove students from a session and or marking them complete. So flipping back over to Pearson Access next, you can see I've got a bunch of students sitting in ready status. So if we select those students in ready status, those need to be removed from this session if we're going to stop it. So let's go ahead and just do that now. So if you select those student tests, go back up to the task dropdown, and then as you can see, we have this Remove Students from Sessions button. Once you do that, you can click Start. And again, we've got all the students there in ready status, and we're going to remove them from the session. And as you can see, it says there are no student test assignments selected, and that's because they were all removed from the session. So coming back down into our session, we've got all of our students, but we still have some that are sitting in resume statuses or exited status. So to show you that process on how we could do that, I'll take this exited student. And we are going to mark his test complete. So selecting him, going into the task dropdown, we have the Mark Student Test Complete option. Select that and click Start. This will take us into the Mark Student Test Complete. You'll notice this reason dropdown. It is a required field, and here is where you will have all of your participation codes. Since this is an exit status, we'll just say that my student refused to test. So that'll be my participation code. And then we'll select that student, and here you'll see that we can now mark that test complete. So exiting out of the screen, coming back into our session, we'll go down and you can see that that student is now sitting in marked complete. Your student sitting in resume status would most likely be still testing. So you could wait for them to either finish out their testing session, or if they're not going to end up going back into that test, then you could still go through the mark complete process there. So coming back to the participation codes, another place that you'll want to know about for that, and let me go back to Pearson Access next. So once you've done that, you can select your students, and then we would want to go to the Manage Student Tests screen. Again, you can plug, this is where you'll need to plug in your participation code for your student. As you can notice, we already have that the mark test complete reason in there, but you would want to apply that as well within this student test. Then click the Save button once you've applied the participation code there. Is there any questions on those features that we've just shown?
This is Dawn. Nothing in the chat that hasn't been addressed, I believe. If there is still some outstanding questions, please type them in the chat and we will address.
Great. Thanks, Dawn.
Yep.
And Tyler, just a time check. I know we still have some left to do,
Yep.
but it is about 2 minutes till 4.
Okay, great. Let me just show real quick the stop session button just because I hadn't there. So that is just sitting on this students in session screen. This is where you would go to stop your test session once you have all of the students in the statuses that would be required to do so. So real quick, this next one is just viewing different reports that are, we have some helpful reporting tools designed to assist you with tracking and monitoring activity within your district or school. So just wanted to show you 2 different types of reporting options that we have within Pearson Access Next. One is the operational reports. Operational reports are different than the published reports or the on-demand reports. They're generated reports that can be displayed or downloaded to help monitor site activity for your district or schools. So coming back over to Pearson Access Next, just real quick, this is covering the 3rd main menu that we have within Pearson Access Next. You would select an action of operational reports. And here you can notice that we have 5 different categories: organization, students and registration, online testing, orders and shipment tracking, and users. And then once you select each category, you'll notice that you have multiple and different reports that you could select. Just to show you that process really quick, we could do a student registration report. Once you get to that report screen, you would click Request Report Refresh and then run it at the administration level. So we would use the current administration and then click the Refresh Report button. You can click the refresh wheel to see a status of that, and then once it has run the report, you'll get a download report button, and then that'll just download to your machine. And then as you can see, we've got all of our students within our organization in that report. So that's just an example how to run an operational report. Next reports are on-demand reports. To view your students' testing report, you can find that under on-demand reports in that reporting category. I can just pop over real quick. Obviously, we won't have any reports in the training site or even live as we're not reporting yet. So let me go back over there really quick. And under reports, you can see that we've got that on-demand report. And again, this functionality is not active currently, but back to the screenshot, this is what that screen would look like. You would enter either your student name or statewide student ID and do a search, and that would bring up your student's report. For reporting results, we also utilize what's known as the parent portal, which provides secure access for parents and guardians to view their students' results. When each student is registered in Pearson Access Next, the system automatically generates a unique claim code for each student that is available through a claim code operational report. The schools download and distribute the unique claim codes for parents and for each student. So parents can add multiple students to their account. And this is just a screenshot of kind of what that site looks like. Now we have an extra exercise for anyone who would want to practice running an operational report. As we are pretty much out of time, we can move right into support topics if everybody would like.
Yeah, Tyler, really quickly.
Yeah,
I
sure.
just want to go back to a question that came up about students with parental exclusions. And
okay.
One thing that we want to point out is if you enter a parental exclusion participation code for a student, it doesn't automatically keep them out of a session. So we've in the past have recommended creating kind of a dummy session. So create a session called parental exclusion. And then once you get students who are coming in and they have a parental exclusion, you can take them and put them into that session. That way, that session will never be started. It will never be used. It's kind of like think of it like a holding tank, kind of. This is the place where all of these students who are not going to be taking this test, this is where their registrations are. So that way you won't have test tickets printed for them, things like that. You will want to enter their participation code, and I recommend doing it once they get submitted, and then just take that student and put them into that parental exclusion session. You'll need to create a session for 9th grade math, English, reading, and science if the student has opted out of all 4 of those, so that you can move them into those 4, and then 10th grade English, reading, math, and science as well. So you'll start working on creating these sessions and all the stuff starting on February 1st. So you've got a week to contemplate how you want to do this. But it is coming up. So I just wanted to touch on that. And it is 4:04. So Tyler, let's briefly talk about where people can go to get support and if they have questions.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I think that puts us
Yep.
at the end.
It does. It really does. This is, we made it. And so just for some support options here, we've got Pearson's help desk phone number on here with their hours. We also have a chat feature within the Pearson Access Next and the Resource Center, as well as submitting a help desk request. So let me pop real quick over there just to show you where you can find that information within Pearson Access Next. So coming back to the home page, you can see here right on that home page we have a submit a customer support request as well as the help desk information, and then we even have a chat now feature on that site. You can also access this within the support tab on the Resource Center with the exact same functionality with the chat now and submitting that request. Also within the slides, which again will be available on the Resource Center, have Rebecca's contact information there and Jared Wright, so you can also probably reach out to them with any questions that you would have. So that is all I have for today for Pearson Access Next. If anybody has any questions, just let me know.
Hey, thank you so much, Tyler, for all of your work, and for Don and Cyril and the rest of the Pearson team. We appreciate you taking your afternoon and sharing your vast knowledge. So we appreciate that. If there's anybody who wants to stick around and ask additional questions, we'll hang out for a few minutes. But this will be posted and the slides will be available on the Resource Center. And so you can watch it. Feel free to use this video or the slides as you do your own trainings with your own schools and within your LEAs. But other than that, we'll wrap up, and anybody who wants to stick around and ask questions, you're welcome to do that. So have a very happy Tuesday afternoon. And Brad, I will send out the link once everything is posted and ready.